The mage scrubbed his hands mechanically, lost in thought. He had assumed he would be examining a corpse by now. Long years had taught him harsh lessons: never assume, never celebrate prematurely. Determined not to repeat mistakes, he let cold rationale take over.
Rejection could still happen. Fever, seizures, hemorrhage. He'd witnessed countless ways a body could fail, but the lungs rose and fell. The pulse held. The crystal had taken. Satisfied with the result, he cleaned up and updated his records. Subject: male, underfed, unremarkable core, uneducated. Transport and confinement had further weakened him. The crystal strands had seated into the occipital with minimal bleeding. Alignment was clean, stable post-surgery condition. He turned back to his subject, clinical eyes capturing every detail. This result was the first definite proof of the resonance theory. Quality, quantity, and strand purity alone weren't enough. Finally, he had cornered the elusive variable he'd been chasing, a cadence between host core and crystal type. He'd relied on endless experiments, brute repetition to push his mastery of strand refinement, injection speed, and dozens of other techniques. Every problem was broken down, dissected, and solved piece by piece. Now the work demanded a different kind of precision. Carefully chosen combinations, each designed to isolate a single variable. Fewer experiments, more analysis and calculations. Filled with new inspiration, his mind was brimming with ideas. He had to observe closely now, but his hands itched to pour his thoughts onto the paper. As always, he never got everything he wanted. The communication stone lighting up cut through his excitement like a cold knife. Of course, he was being called to help in another pointless battle. His jaw tightened, weighing the costs of refusal as the orb continued to pulse. Logic dictated he couldn't refuse. Keeping his business partner strong and victorious helped him too. Especially now, when he'd need a new batch of subjects and crystals, his project went well beyond expensive. The table in front of him had captured every ounce of his interest, so it took some time to accept his own logic and put down the journal. He moved the subject into a rarely used recovery room. He needed him to stay put for at least 3 days, so he hung fresh bags on the iron hooks over the bed frame. Fluids, weak nutrition, and more sedative. He opened the air circulation valve for the room, checked the catheter, adjusted the drainage. 2 jugs of water and a silver platter with a warming sigil for the frozen gruel to keep him docile once he was awake. Hopefully he'd be back before that, but locked the door and reinforced it with magic. The mage geared up quickly. His travel bag was always packed and ready. He stepped out into the freezing cave and cast a spell to illuminate surrounding, walked through the twisted tunnels. He had reshaped this passage himself years ago in a way wind couldn't follow. Once he was outside, strong wind battered his thick coat, snow obscured his vision, and Arctic cold bit into his aging bones. Even the sun never shone this time of year, but he didn't mind. Thanks to his magic, he had many ways to stay comfortable, like embroidered inscriptions inside his coat for heat. This place was perfect for his needs, too harsh for anything alive and devoid of anything valuable someone might look for. He activated several enchantments for high-altitude flight and took off. It would still take him a full day to reach the capital, as he'd need to obscure his flight path like always. After a few minutes, he'd hit his cruising speed several kilometers up in the air, his mind already back to his thoughts he didn't get to write down. The mage didn't believe in luck, but even he acknowledged he'd gotten the short end of the stick too frequently in life. Even now, his summoning couldn't have come at a worse time. When he was young, it bothered him how the fate treated him, and he often cursed her. But as he aged, at some point he gave up on that word and replaced it with statistic. That moment of realization was the catalyst of his plans. What his younger self blamed on fate was a point on a graph to him now. This changed how he thought, how he saw the world. And it was how he saw the most important line of all, the one between the impossible and improbable. Obsessing over it from afar for his whole life, today he felt he could just reach out and touch it. He never intended to cross that line. He wasn't mad. Impossible was called impossible for a reason. He just needed to be the closest one to it. A decade of work was driven not by hope or faith but knowledge. Emotions were weak to time. Knowledge was timeless, thus far better source for endless motivation, a solid reason to keep pushing forward. The mage was well practiced in suppressing his emotions, but he was still a human. Even if he knew this day would come, he got slowly intoxicated with pride and anticipation when he envisioned the future. What happened today meant that he'd be done soon. He would change the mad world he lived in the way he saw fit. Fate could hand him every short stick she had, and he'd still come out on top. 2 days later, the mage's plans ended abruptly, with a well-placed knife between his ribs, courtesy of an assassin sent by his business partner's enemies. Maybe he'd just been distracted by his visions of success, or maybe the emotions clouded his usual cool judgment. He knew there was no mage more capable than him in these lands, and in trying to wrap up the skirmish quickly, he gave an opening to the assassin. Even if his failure was his alone, in the final moment, he thought it was fate herself who acted against him, for daring to challenge her. He cursed her one last time, with his dying breath. The mage died without ever knowing just how cruel fate had truly been to him, and how justified his hatred had become. If she truly existed somewhere, she was surely laughing at him. If he had woken the boy up, he'd realize he had actually reached his goal, and then some more. Maybe he'd not like the extra result, but regardless, his prize was now someone else's. Given the fact he never had any real allies, not trusting even his own kin, his research died with him. No apprentices, no confidants. He didn't even have servants. No one knew the existence of his Arctic lair, or children, stranded in there, locked away with dwindling supplies, and no hope. Solnir came to his senses gradually, pain and fragmented thoughts dripping into his hazy consciousness. He slowly remembered the mage going to his cell and ordering him to follow.